When the mainland Chinese and Taiwanese fighting game communities get brought up in conversation, it's usually tied to the King of Fighters series, because their devotion and love for the franchise has become quite the stereotype that's rooted in many cultural and economic factors. One being that SNK's Neo Geo MVS arcade hardware that the King of Fighters was originally released for was a lot more affordable and accessible than other arcade hardware on the market. The Neo Geo MVS was different from other arcade hardware because it used swappable cartridges instead of dedicated PCBs for individual games, making titles easier to change out while also being way cheaper for arcade operators to purchase than whatever new game that just came out as a whole PCB. But these conveniences also did lead to the MVS being bootlegged and pirated more than probably any other arcade hardware that's not Pac-Man. But hey, that's still a contributing factor to the Neo Geo's dominance in Chinese regions. The MVS's reign in the arcades wouldn't go unchallenged forever though, as the Taiwanese company International Game System, or IGS for short, was formed to help stop the Japanese arcade monopoly in East Asia by creating games domestically to get a hold of that sweet coin-up market share. This led to IGS throwing every idea at the arcade wall, cause in short succession they released a bowling game, a mahjong game, a light gun game, and of course, their take on the fighting game genre, the hilariously absurd Alien Challenge. Everything about Alien Challenge is pure jank. It's an arcade game that looks like an MS-DOS game, and it doesn't even function as it should, because you can literally be guarding an attack and still take full damage from a block string sometimes. Yeah. And this gets even more dire when you realize that Alien Challenge was released the same year as the first Darkstalkers. But you know, I can't help but to love it. It's a stupid game, and that's why you're playing it. And it's obvious that IGS was somewhat in on the joke, because the cast of characters in Alien Challenge are gods who have been stripped of their powers, and now must fight. Which means that the higher powers that make up this world include a werewolf, a football player, and a clown that farts. Cool, sign me up for this religion. Yeah, probably not the best first attempt at a fighting game, but it's definitely a memorable one for me. This is the perfect mystery game tournament fighter. Also, you're not allowed to criticize it, because the game literally tells you that it's a great production that took millions of expenses and thousands of working hours to make, so don't be a jerk about it. But you're probably shocked to learn that Alien Challenge isn't the fighter that I made this video to talk about, because it wasn't until IGS decided to compete against SNK by basically making their own version of the MVS that things started to get really notable. Meet the PolyGame Master, or the PGM for short. Just like SNK's one-slot NVS, the PGM was a JAMA-based motherboard with swappable cartridges that was released at a very competitive price, but it was a lot more powerful than the MVS because it was released 7 years after the MVS came out. The imitation doesn't stop at the hardware though, because the PGM wasn't shy of the market it was trying to take, which has helped give the hardware the stigma of just being a Chinese Neo Geo clone. But it eventually became much more than that thanks to the PGM scoring some coveted cave game shmups and 2 incredible fighting game releases. But before we get to those incredible fighters, let's look at their first fighting game released on the PGM, the Killing Blade. This was IGS's take on Samurai Showdown, and I promise you that even though it just looks like Alien Challenge with the Yuan Dynasty skin, it's a lot more competently made and is actually a tag fighter with some cool characters and combos. But man, this came out the same year as Alpha 3 and King of Fighters 98, so I can't imagine that too many people were lined up at the cabs for our humble little Killing Blade. Even if this is a decent fighter that I have no problem booting up now, this definitely wasn't going to put IGS in any greatest of all time fighting game dev discussions. But showing y'all Alien Challenge and the Killing Blade was very crucial, cause it makes the miraculous jump in quality IGS made for their next 2 fighters seem impossible. So why don't we finally take a look at these fantastic fighting games? And I literally mean take a look, because before I even talk about the game itself, I want you to just see it in motion. This is Martial Masters, an IGS developed fighter released for the PGM in 1999, which is just 1 year after the release of the Killing Blade, which genuinely blows my mind. As you can see, the animations in Martial Masters are fluid, and the sprite work here rivals the greats of the genre, like the Street Fighter 3 series, which is probably the greatest compliment I can give both the PGM and IGS themselves. Thankfully though, Martial Masters isn't just all style with no substance, cause this is one of the best feeling 2D fighters ever in my opinion. Martial Masters is an amalgamation of many fighters of the late 90s, but what makes it special is its abundance of easy to learn system mechanics. It's a 3v3 KOF style team fighter that has throws, supers, universal overheads a la Third Strike, guard bursts, pursuit attacks after a knockdown straight out of Vampire Savior, multiple movement and wake up options, and even a universal command grab. I realized that you either gasped for joy when I said that, or reeled back in disgust. But that's some off-the-wall fighting game design that sickos like me swoon for. Martial Master's central and original mechanic though, is probably one of my favorites in the entire genre. Check out the Shadow Attack. For a bar of meter, every character can summon one of two different unique shadow attacks that appear and attack separately from the player like an assist, giving the player the opportunity to open an attack up or combo them for days. Since they are shadows, once activated they stay out regardless if you're hit or not, giving them a real presence offensively and defensively. Thankfully, Martial Master's combo system is also very lenient, so once you're opened up, expect to get juggled hard. Or infinited. Hey, I never said it was balanced, I just said I loved it. But genuinely, the game plays like a dream, and is surprisingly intuitive as it feels like a more loose King of Fighters, with a tinge of anime thrown in. While the characters appear generic with obvious designs and names like Trunk Master and Monkey Boy, the incredible sprite work and actual gameplay elevate them to another level for me, and have made them some of my favorite characters to play in the entire genre. The cast of 12 characters are based on familiar tropes and Hong Kong martial arts films, like Once Upon a Time in China and Operation Scorpio. But they surprisingly aren't your standard cast of shotos, zoners, and grapplers. We have a Chinese Hung Ga master who just has an aura of coolness around him and some of the most satisfying combos ever as our protagonist. And then we have a Fu Jin White Crane practitioner who's one of my favorite fighting game characters to play, cause her buttons feel so strong and her shadow attacks are ignorant as hell. She's one of those top tiers who's extremely oppressive, but so fun that you can't help but want to be scummy picking her. There's also a dude who wants to be a scorpion, the previously mentioned annoying monkey boy, the drunken master, a housewife with some of the most fun combos in the game, and even a random giant white Christian dude who stumbled in that has saber-toothed super for some reason, if you're into that. All in all, for anyone familiar with KOF or even Street Fighter, Martial Masters is really easy to jump into casually and just does a lot of things right for me. It's one of those games that almost anyone can pick up and start doing cool stuff in instantly. Thankfully, this game is a more well-known hidden gem within the genre, and it gets its well-deserved praise from fighting game enthusiasts in the know. But I can only imagine the love Martial Masters would have gotten if it had a port of some kind in the early 2000s, cause there's a lot of missed potential here with these characters and mechanics. A port would eventually come out 24 years after its arcade debut on the Switch, through an IGS arcade collection, so however you do it, please just try this game out. It's a classic game that deserves your love. But if you were thinking that Martial Masters wasn't anime enough for you, then let's take a look at our second PGM fighter that is on the complete other side of the fighting game spectrum. Spectral versus Generation. At first glance, you're probably thinking that this game looks like a team of developers were told to make a Guilty Gear game based off descriptions alone. But I mean, is that a bad thing? Released in 2005 for the PGM, Spectral vs. Generation is a crossover fighter between the two niche strategy RPGs, Spectral Force and Generation of Chaos by Idea Factory, which probably makes this the second most niche crossover in fighting game history, right behind Hune X Fighters 98. But when I first played this game, I had no idea it was a crossover fighter, so the two franchises really mesh well together aesthetically and ooze that mid-2000s anime goodness, which I think translates to the sprite work in a way that really makes this game stand out. The stages are all desolate and serene, with some seriously great composition, while the characters pop out in an almost cartoonish way that somehow fits the lonely atmosphere. For the characters themselves, we got huge sword bros, JoJo stand users, a dark angel grappler, an annoying ninja dude, and an evil demon girl with a giant scythe and dash hop pressure that would make even Sasquatch from Vampire Savior blush. So, all of your anime fighter bases are covered, which is good, cause Spectral vs Generation plays like your standard air dasher, but just like any cool fighter, there are lots of system mechanics to get crazy with. We have parries, guard cancels, guard breaks, a Guilty Gear dust-like move that allows a follow-up on hit, a state called Burst that gives you infinite meter for a period of time while also boosting your defense up, and finally, a time slowdown activation that's like if the State of Nothingness from Samurai Shodown 5 had a baby with Exard's Roman cancels. Which is honestly the amount of ridiculousness that makes me fall in love with a fighter. I get why people dislike them, but I'm a sucker for a time stop in a fighting game. While the combo system is lenient and allows for some crazy stuff, it definitely has a tough skill ceiling and requires some nice execution to get the real cool stuff going. But it's relaxed enough to allow you to just make up stuff on the spot, so it's a really easy game to pick up for any anime fighter enjoyer. And the cast varies so much from character to character, you're bound to find someone you mesh with. But when in doubt, just pick the Angel Grappler. He's so cool. Spectral vs Generation did surprisingly receive ports onto the PS2 and PSP in Japan and Europe, but sadly, it didn't garner much attention from fighting game enthusiasts at all until being added onto Fightcade 2, where it formed a small community that basically pushed the game competitively for the first time ever. Just another example of good games getting a second chance through accessibility. Unlike Martial Masters though, this game is still mostly unknown even to fighting game enthusiasts, so definitely check it out and get some stupid combos going. While the PGM didn't really stop the chokehold SNK had in China and Taiwan, it was successful enough to get 2 more hardware releases with the PGM2 and the PGM3. And funny enough, the PGM2 would ironically get an exclusive version of the King of Fighters 98 Ultimate match as the hardware's only fighting game, so I guess it all kinda came full circle in the end. The PGM holds a special place in my heart, for not only having 2 really cool fighters released for it, but for also being one of the first weird pieces of gaming hardware that I emulated back in the day, that I had never heard of before the internet. Discovering Martial Masters as a young guy on one quote made me realize that the gaming world was bigger than just America and Japan, and that there are hundreds of fighters out there that I need to discover and play. Thankfully though, all of the fighters I talked about today are easily accessible on Fightcade, so there's something out there for you, whether your taste is jank or highbrow. Thanks!